You have heard that was said, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. But I say unto you, do not resist evil. But if anyone strikes you on the right cheek, turn the other cheek also. And if anyone wants to sue you and take you to court, take your coat, give your cloak as well. And if anyone forces you to go a mile, go also the second mile. You have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies. Do good unto those who persecute you, so that you may be a child of God. For he makes his sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the righteous and on the unrighteous. For if you love only those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet only your brothers and sisters, what more are you doing than others? Do not even the Gentiles do the same? Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. Before I get into the main part of the lesson, I want to explain some of the terms that Jesus used and in what context they're used. First of all, he uses the word evil. And of course, from the human sense, we know exactly what evil is out here. But in unity, we define evil as any human attempt to negate a divine idea. Any human attempt to negate or cross out a divine idea of God. What are the divine ideas? Well, perfect unconditional love, perfect peace, perfect health, perfect human relationships, perfect abundance, and so on. Jesus also talks about if anyone strikes you on the right cheek, turn the other also. This is an Eastern expression. It's an idiom, if you will. And all it means is don't fight and don't quarrel. And if anyone forces you to go a mile, go the second mile. In those days of Jesus, the Roman soldiers, when they moved from one town to another, they would pick out people from the town and make them carry their heavy load for a mile. If they resisted, then they would probably have to carry it all day long, as far as they went. So Jesus is saying, in the vein of non-resistance, if they ask you to go a mile, say, I'll be glad to carry that for a mile, but I'll even be glad to carry it for 2 miles. Usually they will let them go and they'll get someone else. So Jesus is teaching them a principle of non-resistance using events and circumstances of that day that the people would understand. Also, if someone wants to sue you and take your coat, Jesus says, give them your cloak also. In those days, when a person was brought to court being sued, he was usually had his coat taken away because the coat was valuable. And it was kept for kind of a deposit in case there was, in case the man was put in jail or fined. So Jesus is saying, give them your cloak also, because if you resist the taking of the coat, they'll usually take most of your clothes away. And they wore a lot of clothes and shirts and cloaks and coats in those days because the more that they had, it meant that they were in a higher social register. And then Jesus says, love your enemies. Love your enemies. Sounds wonderful, doesn't it? What we teach our kids in Sunday school. But how on earth do you love your enemy? It's not easy. But what has helped me is, first of all, to realize that that person is a spiritual being made in the image and likeness of God, just like you are, just like I am. Therefore, they're a perfect child of God. Oh, I know they may not be expressing it, but it's within themselves. And if you can begin to look through the appearance of anything unlike the nature of God and begin to behold the Christ in them, things begin to change. Also, be aware that that person who may have done something to you probably was acting at their very highest and best that they could muster at that particular moment. Perhaps they were working on some vital things within themselves, trying to work out something, and they just lost it. So it's helpful if we will remember that, begin to see them differently, and not resist what they have done. The world teaches that the principle of resist not evil sounds like the most foolish and impractical of all human teachings. Yet it is the wisest and most practical and most powerful of the teachings of Jesus Christ. But whatever stands in the way of you and I expressing the fullness of God that's within us, whatever's standing in the way must be cut loose. What are some of the things? Unforgiveness, fear, resentment, hate, anxiety, tension, pressure, all the rest of it. These are the barriers that we put up, and they must be cut loose. Beautiful story out of the Revolutionary War. This man was very fearful because he knew that the British were coming, and he felt that if they found him, they would probably kill him. So he thought about that, and he decided on a plan, and he secreted a boat down by the river, hid by some bulrushes, so that he could pop out of his house and run down there when the British were coming. Well, one dark night, the cry came, "The British are coming, the British are coming." So according to his well-rehearsed plan, he dashed out of the house and ran down to the riverbank, got in his boat, and started to row. It seemed like there was a very, very strong current. It was difficult to row, but he kept on. He rowed all night. It was so foggy that he couldn't see farther than the front of his face. When the light came up in the morning, he was totally exhausted from rowing so hard. And as the fog lifted, he discovered that he was exactly where he had started because he had forgotten to cut himself loose from the dock. How many times have you and I wanted the best that God has for us, but we won't cut loose of unforgiveness? We won't cut loose of fear or any of the rest of it. I want to read you out of the book, The Aquarian Gospel of Jesus the Christ. It says, when man comes to himself and comprehends the fact that he is the Son of God and knows that in himself lies all the powers of God, he is a mastermind, and the elements will hear his voice and gladly do his will. Two sturdy asses bind the will of man. Their names are fear and unbelief. When these are caught and turned aside, the will of man will know no bounds. Then man has but to speak, and it is done. You know, many times we would sure like to change another person. And we kind of give them the idea that, golly, if you would make certain changes, I could love you a lot more. Ever felt that way? But there's only one way that I know of that you can change another person, which you really can't, but it's begin to see them differently. Begin to see them as a spiritual being, as a perfect child of God. Begin to treat them that way. begin to act towards them like they were really something special. In California a few years ago, they tried a test. So they brought in this, quote, expert and sent him into this classroom with a class of probably 10-year-olds, something like that. He was to give them a test, and he would identify the spurters in the class. Now, a spurter is one who had tremendous potential but wasn't using it. So he came in and gave this test, took the test out, did not correct it, had no intentions of correcting it because it wasn't a proper test. But nobody knew it except him. He came back in and he said, well, now the test shows this, that Susie over here has great potential, but she's not using it very much. And Billy over here, he's just lazy, but he's got great potential. Could be at the head of the class. And he pointed out about 10 of these children and said they were all spurters. And then he left. Now the children didn't know any different. They thought they were smart because the expert had said they were smart. The test had proved they were smart. The teacher didn't know any different either. She thought they were smart. And so she began to teach them in a way and see them in a way where they really had it. And all of those 10 rose to the top of the class and stayed there. Because she was teaching those particular kids like they really had it. They got the idea that this must be the way I am, and so they have a new picture in their mind, and they began to change, and they rose to the head of the class. Incidentally, the teacher got sued. She was sued by the parents of the children that were not identified as spurters. They tried the same thing up in San Francisco at a college. Got the same results. The ones that were identified as spurters rose to the head of the class and stayed there. Remember this, that God can do no more for you than God can do through you. It's the way God works. There's no God out there that's doing something to you. God is here within yourself. And God always works through you. Your hands are the hands of God. Your feet are the feet of God. Your mouth is the mouth of God. Just remember that. I want to read you what Emmett Fox says. He says, when you hold resentment against anyone, you are bound to that person by a cosmic link, a really rough, long, metal chain. You are tied by a cosmic tie to the very thing that you hate. The thing you hate is now part of your consciousness. The one person in the whole world whom you dislike is the very one to whom you are attaching yourself by a hook that is stronger than steel. You know, we have this flow coming from within us, which is the flow of God. God always wants the highest and best to be expressed through us. But we have freedom of choice, and God will not override that freedom of choice. You and I will block the flow of God's beautiful goodness by the thoughts that we keep in our mind that are unlike the nature of God. There's one thing that God will not do, and He will not overcome your right to choose your own thoughts. We have freedom of choice, and it will be never taken away. There's another thing that God cannot do. And that may shock some of you because we've always been told there's nothing that God can't do. But God cannot operate in opposition to his own laws. And that's something God cannot do. There was a woman that came to me about, perhaps a few years ago. She had just lost her job. She was 59 years old. She said that nobody wanted her. She was too old. She had only a few years left of productive work. And besides, I've looked all over and there's no jobs for me. So we talked about that for a moment, and I said, let's flip that around. The reason you can't find a job is because you're looking for a job through eyes that say there is no job for me. Let's turn that around. Let's not resist that by giving all of this negativity, but let's assume and let's affirm that there's the best job in the world waiting for you right this very moment. God knows where it is. And as soon as you begin to get rid of some of this negativity and begin to think in terms of God thoughts, then you will be able to find what you need. About 3 weeks later, she came to me in church and she said, John, you'll never guess what happened. And I said, try me. She said, I have the most wonderful job in the world. I'm working with the most wonderful people in the world. And John, at 59, I'm making more money than I've ever made before. Do you feel the power of non-resistance in your life? Think what we can do as we begin to shed some of these outworn ideas that don't serve us any longer. I want to leave you with a final thought. It came out of Joel Goldsmith's book, Thunder of Silence. And I love that. Joel Goldsmith said this: live above the human sense of life. Begin to live from the spiritual point of view, more so than you are now. Never, never, never give evil for evil. Never, never hope or pray that anyone will have to suffer anything. This is the way of the Christ. And I want to give you one final story that kind of tells the whole story of this lesson. One of the ladies in our congregation a few years ago had a daughter, a teenage daughter. Now, we would probably say, boy, she was wild. But one Saturday night, when the mother was gone, she took the mother's brand new car and went out on a drinking spree. Got into an accident and totaled the whole car. Just think of that. What do you think your reaction would be? Fortunately, she wasn't hurt. But she was in great fear because she knew when her mother came home, her mother was going to kill her. Now, I know none of you would do that, right? But this is what the mother said. She said, daughter, I do not appreciate what you have done. I do not appreciate the lifestyle that you have chosen to live. But there is nothing that you could ever do to make me stop loving you. Do you feel the power in non-resistance? Can you feel the power in that? Probably most of us would do the other way. And what do you think the outcome would be? She solved the problem because she didn't make it a problem. She just put God's love into it so that her daughter knew without question but she had all the love she needed. It turned her around today. She's a beautiful mother, a wonderful person. But I want you to feel the power of non-resistance. The teachings of Jesus Christ are true. And once you put them into your life, you'll find that you're living above the human part of us, and you're living more from the spiritual point of view. Have lots of fun this week as you practice non-resistance in your life. And God bless you. God bless you.